All right, it's 1 o'clock. We'll go ahead and come to order. First on the agenda, review our agenda for today. Does anybody have any revisions or additions, anything like that for the agenda today? No. Next, approval of minutes from our October 23rd meeting. Take a minute if you need to and review the minutes from our previous meeting, and we will approve those.
Sorry, I was still in the take there.
Any revisions to our minutes from October 23rd? Nope. So without objection, they'll be approved. Moving on to our action items, we have three variance requests that our hearings officer heard, and we need to ratify those decisions. Given that we do have two new board members, I've asked Drenda to sort of remind us of the process and kind of summarize the process, particularly when the hearings officer has already heard the cases, and then we'll get into those.
Thank you. Mr. Chair and members of the board, there are two options for hearing variances in our regulations that allows for a hearings officer to hear variances for our on-site wastewater regulations in outside of a board meeting. And you all voted Lisa as the hearings officer who does that. And then you also have the option to hear a variance at a board meeting. And so there are those two, and I think it's really nice when we are reminded which version we have chosen because the process is different. So for the three variances that are on the agenda today, we selected the first option, which was to have Lisa as the hearings officer hear the variance in advance of the board meeting. That decision gets made with a kind of a collaborative conversation between staff. Usually the sanitarian comes to me with some information about it. If they're pretty straightforward and it's something that that the board has heard, nothing out of the ordinary, we recommend that to Lisa to do it as a separate hearing that she oversees. And then she has the final decision. So typically she'll say, yes, I'm comfortable with that. Let's do it. Let's get it scheduled. Or no, let's go ahead and hear this in front of the full board. And so in this instance, that's the process we used. Staff gave their recommendation. I went to Lisa. She said, yep, let's just hear these three in advance of a Board of Health meeting. So those three hearings all happened on the same day, November 20th. Lisa came and spent 3 very lovely hours with us here in this very room and heard all three variances. There's a couple of pieces that I want to remind the board and bring it to your attention. The first is because Lisa heard the whole variance in a hearing outside of the Board of Health meeting, they won't be heard again today, which means that what you're going to get is the packet so that you can review it in advance. You're going to get Lisa's summary of what the conversation was, and you're going to get her recommendation. So that's what the process looks like at a Board of Health meeting when she hears them in advance. The second piece of information to keep in mind as you're hearing the summaries and getting the recommendation is to make sure that you're referring to those criteria. And so the criteria are in the packet for each of the variances. And so an example for the very first one is on page 46 it's a PDF, page 46. It's actually page 45 numbered in your packet. So there's 11 criteria. And what is really important to remember as Board of Health members who have to make the final decision on these variances is that by law, an administrative rule, and our regulations, all of these criteria have to be met. And so during the hearing, that's what Lisa's paying attention to. And those are the questions that are being asked. And that's the information that's being prompted, right? Are these criteria being met? And so what you see are some notes that were taken by staff at the time of the discussions happening at the hearings. And so what you're going to hear from Lisa is essentially the information about these criteria, were they met, were they not met, and her recommendation will then be based on whether the criteria were met or not met. So I say that because it helps keep the process pretty straightforward, right? There's a lot of information that comes on a variance, but at the end of the day, the criteria are what the Board of Health are looking at. So the thing about the criteria is that some of them are pretty straightforward, but some of them are a little objective, which then gives you an opportunity to have discussion. And so what the county attorney for the deputy county attorney, Nico Hash, has always advised is if there is if it's not straightforward in the criteria, that's the point at which the board needs to talk about it. You all get to deliberate over it. And so I think that that's also really important, just to remind the board that that's your power, right? That's where you come in. If it was straightforward, we wouldn't need to do this, right? Sometimes it's not straightforward. And so you all have to chat about it. You have to talk about it. You have to deliberate about it. And so focus on the criteria, have your good conversation, and then you'll get to take the vote. So that's just a quick overview on the process that's used when the hearings officer hears it in advance. And then keep in mind that it's the applicant's burden of proof. So we ask a lot of questions in a hearing. Lisa is great. She asks a ton of questions. But at the end of but when it comes down to it, it's really the applicant's responsibility to present information that she can use to then determine if the criteria has been met. So it's up to the applicant to give us what we need. And so that's that. I don't think there's anything else I wanted to say, just to kind of set the stage for you all. And then let you, and another reason why I wanted to do that is because we have 3. And we only have a 2-hour meeting. So if we can keep it focused on the criteria, have really good discussion, and stay within the hour allotted for the variances, that would be ideal. So, yeah.
All right, so first we will turn to the variance request for 6837 Hilma Drive, Helena. Lisa, if you could give a brief summary of the case and your recommendation.
Sure. So the variance was heard on November 20th for the property owned by Thomas and Paula Fenton at 6837 Hilma Drive in Helena. The variance request was for 2 different aspects of the rule. Section 4.31, table 4A, the setback distances. The applicant was requesting a reduction in the required setback distance between an absorption field and the designated 100-year floodplain. And also section 4.35, the wastewater treatment system must be located to maximize the vertical separation distance from the bottom of the absorption trench to the seasonally high groundwater level, bedrock, or other limiting layer. But under no circumstances may this vertical separation be less than 4 foot of natural soil. So I've heard a number of variances in this neighborhood. It's an older developed neighborhood prior to floodplain delineation. And so the homes were built. This house is experiencing sewage backups and inability to use their water based on the fact that they have raw sewage in their house. They hired a contractor who did some illegal work. And once they found that out, they came to the health department and wanted to do the right thing. And so this very part of that request for them to bring their property into compliance. What they proposed was that they would correct the work completed by the contractor and bring the lot into compliance with all the applicable laws. There is not a location on the property that meets the criteria due to the delineation of the floodplain and floodway. There's no place on the property itself that's 100 feet away. And they don't have enough separation vertical separation between the limiting layer, which is a perched groundwater table, and the bottom of where a traditional septic system would be installed. So they're proposing to bring in fill and build a sand mound to provide for their sewage disposal. Through the hearing process, talking with the owners, the Fentons, they have met all the criteria for granting the variance, and my recommendation is that we grant because all the criteria have been met, along with the following conditions, which is that all necessary floodplain development permits be obtained, that the system will be designed by a professional engineer licensed in the state of Montana, that all tank openings be equipped with watertight lids, that the variance conditions be filed with the Lewis and Clark County Clerk and Recorder, that the existing well that has been disconnected be properly abandoned by a licensed well driller, and variances usually expire one date after they're approved, and in this case, they asked for a 2-year expiration because the flood control stuff that they have to go through to get the permits to construct that septic system sometimes can be time consuming. So my recommendation is to grant that 2-year time period as well. We're going to have questions.
Yeah, any questions?
Sounds like they're trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, this one sounds pretty straightforward to me.
All right, do we have a motion to ratify the hearing officer's recommendation?
I'll move.
A second? Any public comment on this variance request? All right, any additional discussion from the board or any additional questions before we vote? And Mike, when we vote, in order to vote, you'll have to put your camera on. I should have warned you about that sooner. But we have a motion to ratify the hearing officer's request. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those. All right, the motion passes. Next, we'll turn to 1025. Is it Renee Road? Lisa?
Yes, Chair. So again, on November 20th, a variance hearing was held for the Russ and Carrie Holman property located at 1025 and 1035 Renee Road in Helena, Montana. This property, not far from the previous variance request, is for the same two sections of the rule, section 4.31, table 4A, setback distance in feet, for the reduction in the required setback distance from the absorption system to the 100-year floodplain, and section 4.35 to maximize the vertical separation distance from the bottom of the absorption trench to the seasonally high groundwater table, bedrock, or other limiting layer, but under no circumstances shall this vertical separation be less than 4 feet of natural soil. This situation, there are two dwellings that are connected to the same septic system, and that septic system no longer accepts any effluent. So their septic tank is having to be pumped out periodically every couple of weeks, and if not even less time than that before the tank gets filled back up, because that absorption field that's currently there is no longer accepting that sewage effluent. Again, this is a piece of property that was developed prior to the floodplain delineation and prior to the septic system requirements in the canopy. Let's see. On this variance request, all the criteria were met, and my recommendation is to grant the variance with the following conditions: that all necessary floodplain development permits be obtained, that the system will be designed by a professional engineer licensed in the state of Montana, and that all tank openings be equipped with watertight lids. I did ask this property owner if they wanted the 2-year extension, and they have already started the process for getting their floodplain permits. So they felt very that they could have this system installed soon rather than having a whole bunch of paperwork to wade through before being able to do it. Plus, they want to get it done as soon as possible because they are having to pump, and that's expensive. So again, my recommendation would be to grant this variance.
Thank you. Any questions? Do we have a motion to ratify the hearing officer's recommendation?
I'll make a motion.
Thank you. A second?
Second.
Thank you. Any public comment on this variance request?
No, Chair.
All right, any last questions before we vote? All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? And the motion passes. Next, we will move to the variance request for 3030 Medicine Rock Creek Road, Wolf Creek. Lisa?
Thank you, Chair. Again, this hearing was held on November 20th for the property owner Stacy Clausen regarding his property located at 3030 Medicine Rock Creek Road in Wolf Creek, Montana. He was requesting a variance from section 4.35, the vertical separation between the seasonally high groundwater table, bedrock, or other limiting layer, and the distance, that vertical distance between the bottom of the absorption system. This is a, there's no building on the property. It's a vacant lot, pretty much sort of at the top of a mountain and down the side of a mountain. He has owned the parcel since 2014. There are no other options available for waste disposal. However, I do not believe that he met criteria 8 and 9 on the list of 11. 8 is an undue hardship, and 9 is circumstances beyond his control. I did ask him a number of times what the undue hardship would be. Since there's nobody there, they wouldn't not be, somebody having to move because there's nobody living there. The circumstances that he could have reasonably prevented, I don't think exist. Prior to buying the lot, he could have come to a sanitarian to discover whether or not he could have gotten a permit for septic system placement on that property. And so therefore, my recommendation is to deny the variance request.
Thank you. Any questions?
Mr. Chair, for reference, the criteria, specifically 8 and 9 that Lisa was discussing, and those notes from the hearing are on 114 on the PDF, but it's okay, oh.
The second page, it's here online.
Yeah, it's up there. For those that have it in front of them, I was just trying to figure out which page to flip to, but it's towards the back of that packet, that specific packet for that variance.
Yeah, 113.
Yeah. 113. For reference.
Oh, I just had a question. So they wanted to build a home on it, and it's a hillside, and he just bought it without doing any inquiry whatsoever.
Yeah, I asked him, trying to ascertain whether or not he did some due diligence. And his response to me was he walked around the property. And that was it. Yeah,
How big is the property?
it's over 20 acres, I believe.
And there's no buildable site other than,
Yeah, no, there's no other location. It's on a mountainside. And so the only area where there is enough of a level, large enough spot, there's not enough natural soil to be able to meet that 4 foot.
Obviously, due diligence is a factor here. How much does, from a legal perspective, topography create an undue hardship? At what point, from a legal perspective, can that, I mean, we're talking 20 acres, that's a sizable chunk of land, and we have a 20-acre parcel here that is unbuildable. I mean, I get the due diligence factor, but at what point does topography meet the legal requirement of an undue hardship?
Mr. Chair and Mayor Harris, so what Nico Hash, our deputy county attorney, has said is that there is no definition for either hardship or extraordinary conditions. So the Board of Health, you get to deliberate and decide.
So I would say that in the design standards, there are maximum slopes that septics can be built on.
Sure.
This was the only portion of the lot. Adam, are you here? It was like 8 or 9%, wasn't it? And the rest was well above that for the rest of the lot, basically.
Yeah, I think that kind of the crux of the board's purview here is whether or not we deem the topography of this site to be an extraordinary condition and an undue hardship. I think that's kind of the discussion that we have.
can I clarify? So it's rock, apparently. There's not enough soil for like a drain field.
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
Right.
I can see that. My dad bought some property like that.
Mm-hmm.
There really wasn't any buildable sites on it.
Yeah.
Are there other sewage treatment options available to this individual?
No.
There's no way to pump it up and over somewhere.
No, there's nowhere within reason. He would either have to buy more property somewhere else that could meet the requirements. There's no municipal systems anywhere around where you could do a lift station to, City of Wolf Creek or whatever. So
No other methods.
there's no.
Okay.
Is there anything that you could add to be helpful?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Beth
Conversation.
Norberg, Environmental Program Supervisor. I think it's not necessarily an option, but the only permittable wastewater treatment disposal method out there would be a seasonal use holding tank. So he'd only be able to use the property recreationally. So 120 days per calendar year is the limit for a seasonal use holding tank. And so, no, he would not be able to permanently live on the property 365 days a year. But there are properties in our county that utilize seasonal use as a recreation property. But that's about it, that would meet all the requirements of the regulation. There's no permittable system for full-time use.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So is there any?
Yeah.
If we grant this, there's no environmental impact. It's just a matter of whether or not he meets the hardships conditions, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
8 and 9. Yep.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Oh, so if we vote no, we're not going to grant the variance. Does he still have the option of using it seasonally?
Sure.
Okay, this was just for the.
Yeah,
permit.
this was for he wanted to
Like
build a
a-
house. Yeah,
okay.
a house to.
Okay.
I guess the question is there a potential property nearby that he could join to this that would make it where you could get if you were to buy it?
Yeah, Adam's probably better to answer that question. He was at the location. Adam.
There's a vicinity map in your packet.
Yeah.
You can kind of see on that. I don't know if Sandy has.
What page? Get to the right one.
Yeah, a little bit more. Right. Well, you can go further. There's a little bit more of that one. So where that blue dot is basically the level spot where Mr. Clausen would like to build. And it's right in the middle of it. Well, not right in the middle, but it's on that 32.64 acre lot. It's essentially, like Lisa said, on the side of a mountain. So it's like, so he kind of just has, yeah, that's really technical terms right there. But all of those property lines are quite far away. There's not really, it's all on that side of the mountain where that shallow bedrock is. There's not really an option for him to pump anywhere around anybody else's area. And most of those other lots on there aren't developed either. There's the ones at the base of the mountain have some houses, but that spot there on either side, there's not really any option for him to move off into somebody's property who might have soil, I guess is.
So if it's so steep, there's a road that goes up there?
Yes,
There's a road in there.
Out.
Okay. So if he had a holding tank, he'd have to have it pumped if he used it seasonally. Yeah. I was just wondering if a truck could get up there.
I would
pump
wonder
it,
this.
the holding.
When was this subdivision done?
That was created in 93.
93.
It was when this lot was created, yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessarily a subdivision, but the lot was created in 93.
And do we know if were to be created today that we would say, no, you can't break it up in that manner?
I can
Board
probably.
of Health probably wouldn't.
Comment on some of that. Mr. Chair, members of the board, with divisions of land, the Platting Act that you review as a county commissioner, would have some different standards definitely that they would need to look at, in allowing this to maybe happen. From the Sanitation Act, which is our realm, which is what DEQ, they are our overseeing body. If it's over 20 acres or greater, you don't have to go through the state DEQ process. You just have to come to your local Board of Health, your local sanitarian, and go through permitting in that fashion. So if someone were to break up properties into 20 acre or more pieces, there's nothing that says you couldn't do it from a sanitation perspective, because each lot owner would then get their approvals separately instead of all at once, like they would with a subdivision that's less than 20 acre lots, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, and that's where,
exactly what I was.
right, and that's where as a county commissioner, you would look at those subdivisions. And you may even under the Platting Act, if something came along that was greater than 20 acres, there very well may be something in the Platting Act that says, even though it's not subject to a DEQ level review, it may be, we want to know, are there suitable areas if we're going to approve these lots through platting. So I don't know if that helps at all, but.
Yeah, that is helpful. Thank you.
I think really from our perspective, from the group here, I think we need to, as Trent laid it out earlier, kind of focus our discussion on the two requirements that are being met in Lisa's review. And I think our really boils down to whether or not we view the topography of this to be a undue hardship in itself.
And
I think
extraordinary. Conditions would be the other one.
And I mean, this was purchased 11 years ago. It's for a single family dwelling, correct? It's of intent. So it's not like a rental or something like that. I think this is a person trying to build a house on a large piece of land with one suitable spot that doesn't have an environmental impact. I think the land itself in my view, might meet the requirements of an undue hardship. That's kind of where I'm leaning right now, but I would be open to all discussion from the other board members.
So I guess to clarify, if any of the conditions are not met, that is too much. Okay.
Yeah, the criteria, those 11 criteria have to be met in order for the variance to be granted.
Okay.
Yeah, and those criteria are set in administrative rule by DEQ. So we don't have authority to change them. They are what they are. They are an administrative rule. It's the board has the ability to deliberate over the definitions of undue hardship and extraordinary conditions. So, yeah, because there are no definitions in law for either of those terms. So you get to decide what that means.
And for me, where I'm at, I think for criteria 9 could not have reasonably prevented is sort of what I'm sticking on right now. Were the criteria generally the same in 2014, where a review would have resulted in the same debate we're having now?
Yes, the rules have not changed in regard to depth to bedrock or the criteria for a variance.
Okay. And would it have been equally as easy in 2014 when they bought the property to get the information that we have today?
In staff's opinion, yes, our process for site evaluations and for giving people information on properties in 2014 would have been very similar, in my opinion. But that's for you guys to decide.
I'm putting you on the spot here. In your experience, can you think of any similar cases that have come before the Board of Health where we've had this similar kind of topography issue, similar issues with whether or not it was undue hardship? Can you think of anything where we've made that decision before in other cases?
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I want to say in 2021, maybe 22. Lisa was our hearings officer. The most recent one, I will say. I'm sure there are others. The most recent one was for a property in the North Hills of Helena. There really was no other place for a septic system, less than 4 feet. Very similar in terms of topography, slopes, almost identical. But in that situation, so there was a situation in which the property owners definitely knew that there was no soil on this. Sorry, it was a neighbor came over while we were doing a site evaluation, said, "Oh yeah, of course there's no soil here." Knew that the property was for sale. The people who had been doing their due diligence and wanted a site evaluation to see if they should buy the property decided not to buy the property because of the depth of groundwater. The neighbor who knew there was no soil bought that property and then did a boundary line adjustment with his lot and this new property, and then came and wanted a variance to be less than 4 feet. That variance was denied. They did not provide suitable information to show undue hardship or those circumstances, extenuating circumstances. It was appealed to the DEQ. The DEQ did uphold the Board of Health's decision to deny that variance. The property owners did come back though and reapplied with different new information to support undue hardship and those circumstances, and that variance was approved. So that is also a potential route here too, if, depending on which way it goes, but that was a similar variance. Similar conditions, site conditions, I would say the board would have to discuss if they consider the criteria, similar between that one and this one, because there are some differences in staff opinion there too. So,
thank you.
Again, board decision.
Thank you.
Because for me, this does meet undue hardship criteria, but does not meet, could not reasonably have prevented.
I can see that.
Is there any, what sort of regulations are there about helping a person reframe their application or rewrite their application, where you might help them do it? And I know at some point you can't do the whole work for them.
Yeah. So Mr. Chair, Commissioner Rolfe, before we have a variance, and anytime we have a variance application, we do sit down with them and do almost like a pre-application meeting with them.
Yeah.
We go over the application. We specifically target these criteria because a lot of times these seem to be the hardest in ways to meet. Adam, our staff sanitarian, sat down with his consultant and, sat down with his consultant. Hearsay, his consultant did also brief him previous to the meeting that you're going to be asked these questions, and is your burden of proof as the applicant to be able to provide that. So there was quite a bit of that communication happening. It just depends on when they go in the meeting, are they actually doing it?
Mhm.
So I don't know if that completely answers your question about that, but it can be difficult because we do sit down with them and we do go over, we have a whole sheet that attaches to the application that talks about those applicant responsibilities.
Mhm.
And we really hammer those criteria. And all we can hope is when you go to the meeting that they actually provide the information that
Sure.
is their burden of proof.
And to me, it's really important that you do that to help people do what
Yeah.
they want to, if there's a way to do it.
Oh, absolutely. And I will say that we, as staff, we really try to go through, is this your last option before they even apply for a variance? Because we know one of the conditions is they have to have alternate options. If there's an alternate option, they need to explore it. And that's in those other criteria, really. But the 8 and 9 are the ones we really want that owner to be able to verbalize, that reason they meet the criteria. And, that was part of why we're having this discussion is I think that wasn't clear.
Yeah, and I did try to ask questions to draw the right responses. And I just didn't feel like I got the right response. When I asked him, how long have you owned the property? 2014. So you've owned it for 11 years and you haven't tried to build on it. Have you done any, sort of research and there just wasn't any response. I asked him about sort of hardship. What's the hardship? Why wouldn't be able to build? Normally when I ask those types of questions, I want to hear my family won't have a home. Okay, that's an undue hardship like the previous two. We're not in the business of telling people the home you've, spent 30 years paying for is no longer livable. If there's a way we can get around it in my mind, on a property that has not been developed, there's plenty of opportunity to understand how to develop it prior to purchasing it. And so for me, I'm like you, Dr. Nast. I really think 9 is not met. 8 is a good conversation to have because what is undue for me may not be undue for everybody. And that's why we're voting members on a board. We can decide that way. But I think it's also important to note that the rules and regulations that we're given are the bare minimums, right? So if you can't meet the bare minimums that are put in place, you probably should have known that before you purchase the property. So that's where I land, at least on number 9. Number 8, I also feel like it's not undue hardship because he wouldn't have bought the property if he had done his due diligence in number 9 to know that he might not be able to build on it, which is why I asked him when he purchased the property, because maybe if he purchased the property in 72 and all these things didn't exist, all the requirements didn't exist, that would be the undue hardship. When I bought the property, I didn't know that it had to meet all these requirements, but he didn't. He bought the property in 2014 where the requirements are exactly the same today as they were then. So that's how I arrived at the undue hardship.
You probably still didn't know.
Well, and that's true. That's true. But I mean, there's a reason why there's houses built on the bottom of the mountain, right? Because that's where all that good soil washed to.
Yeah.
That's where it's at now.
I tend to agree with you. And you, 8 and 9, it would be tough, especially 9.
Yeah, I think I agree as well. I think both 8 and 9, under 8, the applicant has to establish an undue hardship, not any hardship, but it specifically has to be an undue hardship. I don't think we know information about, I mean, their application said that they were using this to build their home, but we don't have any information about if that doesn't happen, are they going to be unhoused?
Right.
Is this the only option? I mean, the 11 years having the property and not having developed it, I would say is not in their favor without additional information that that's their burden to provide as far as making that demonstration as to they will experience an undue hardship, a pretty severe hardship, not just a hardship, right? So I think that I see why, that your recommendation was that they didn't meet that, and I think I agree with that. And then number 9, I think I'm looking at the criteria addressing extraordinary conditions that the applicant could not have reasonably have prevented. And I do think it's reasonable when you're looking at a piece of property, especially one with really unique topography, with really unique in an area that's surrounded by a lot of land that's kind of underdeveloped. You're not in the city. I think a reasonable person should be doing that inquiry with how they're going to develop the property with the local licensing bodies, and that seems to not have happened here. And again, the burden is on them to demonstrate that what they did was reasonable, and I don't think, based on what information we have, that has been met either.
Check with Mike.
Do we have any input or discussion or questions from our 2 members online, Mike or Melinda?
No, I agree with everything everyone is saying, especially the undue hardship, or excuse me, the could not reasonably have prevented. Just because you don't know the law doesn't mean you shouldn't research the law when buying a certain piece of property, knowing that you're probably going to want to build on it.
Agree. I also feel 8 and 9 are no's for all the reasons that have been stated.
Any additional discussion?
Well, I feel like he has an option of a cabin that could be used part-time, so it's not like it's a 0 for him.
And I just think the staff has done a good job of trying to be maybe consumer friendly and taking care of our customers. And sometimes people make mistakes, and that's just the way it is. They have to live with it.
All right. Do we have a motion to ratify the hearing officer's recommendation?
So moved.
Thank you. A second?
I'll second.
All right. Any public comment on this variance request?
No, Chair.
All right. All those in favor, aye.
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 All those opposed? And the motion passes. All right. Thank you, Lisa, for all of your work on those 3 variance requests. And thank you to the staff for all of the information that you gathered and your inspections. Very well done, as usual. All right. Our next agenda item is our number 4 water quality protection district update. Who's doing that?
Yeah, we have Jennifer McBroom, who is our Water Quality Protection District Supervisor.
We had a good meeting, I thought.
Good afternoon. Thank you for letting me update on the happenings and activities of the district. Like Brenda said, I am Jennifer McBroom and I'm the supervisor for the Water Quality Protection District. So just a few updates. We have a free arsenic and uranium testing program. We are in the winding down phase of that project, of our program. The district continues to administer the free arsenic and uranium water testing program. We have had approximately 360 residential water samples that have been tested since the program began. And of these, 11 households received $300 in financial assistance toward the installation of a reverse osmosis treatment system. Assistance was provided to households whose laboratory results showed arsenic and or uranium at or above the EPA maximum contaminant level MCLs. The program's budget had a total of $27,000. So the next steps for this program is, so with the demand of testing kind of stabilizing, we don't get a lot of people coming in. The funding timeline ends June 2026. So staff has begun the process of gradually closing out the program. So the remaining efforts include a step process to end the program. We will end the free testing at the end of this year. Next, we'll reach out to those residents whose results were at or above the MCL to see if they would like to install a treatment or may want to, to get that $300 rebate. After that, then we'll reach out to those who are elevated and see if they would like to install a treatment system. And lastly, we'll kind of circle back to those who have met, the at or above the MCL and see if they would like any of the, if there is additional money left over from that program, we will offer it to them. I don't think anybody will turn it down, just because there's an ongoing cost for keeping that RO up, up. There's filters and the membranes that they still need to, cost every year, usually every 6 months or so. They have to switch those out. So that's the arsenic and uranium program. The next, I'm going to give an update about the Grizzly Gulch project. So this project first started back in 2017 with a reclamation and development planning grant with DNRC for $50,000. So the Grizzly Gulch project was a surfer placer mine dating back to the 1870s and was the Pretty Girl placer mine of Grizzly Gulch, about 5 miles. Mining activities have obliterated Grizzly Creek and disturbed 4 acres of floodplain. Materials have been displaced and the site contains several deep open pits and unstable embankments that have disrupted the surface water and groundwater flows. So after that planning grant was submitted, we applied for a reclamation and development grant to DNRC again to reclaim the mine. So with this program, all projects that were submitted during that biennium are ranked by DNRC and then forwarded with their recommendations for funding to the governor's office for the 2021 legislative session. We just made the cutoff for funding, and funding became available around 2023 in the amount of about $293,000. After putting in a request for bid out last year, Bullet Construction was selected to reclaim the site, with project implementation starting in April of this year and ending in May of this year. And Sandy's kind of going through our website that we have a story map on this project. It's a pretty good one. The objectives of the project were completed and successful. They were: 1, reclaim natural surface and groundwater interaction; 2, create riparian and wetland habitat; and 3, improve public safety and provide public access. So we have a great website that showcases all the work that was done. So this grant ends December 2026, and all is mostly complete except that the landowner needs to finish the bike path along the newly constructed creek. And we are also monitoring the creek and the vegetation that was planted. There is another small DNRC grant that was sponsored by the Conservation District in the amount of $5,064. So that money will go towards any additional vegetation that we need to do. The deer has kind of decimated some of these plants. And so we have put in fencing, and we were spraying with some deer repellent. Actually, that worked pretty good. But so we'll go back next year, depending on what the success rate is, and then we'll use the leftover money to purchase any additional vegetation that you know, we'll work with the landowner because I know he has plans, but it'll go towards vegetation. So that's the Grizzly Gulch. And then the other work we do is monitoring over 160 groundwater wells for water levels monthly and quarterly. We completed our surface water network of 11 sites on 3 streams this October by gathering the flow at each of these sites, including our rewatering project on Prickly Pear Creek. We are currently revamping the way we're displaying all our work through ArcGIS story maps, which will be available early next year. Now, though, this is one of the story maps that Sandy went through. Through interactive story maps, we have all our groundwater and surface water, water quality and quantity data on the website. So this is just one component, but if you back out, we actually have the interactive data and mapping site. And then you can access groundwater, and then that has the water levels and water quality. And then we'll be adding surface water sites. And then, like I said, revamping kind of the way that all looks. It'll be a little bit easier to kind of maneuver. And then lastly, we had a presentation on Tuesday night at our Water Quality Protection District Board meeting, our very successful outreach event, the Water Watchers program, which has been going on for over 30 years. And this program reaches to all 4th and 5th graders in the Helena and East Helena schools, which is about 1,500 students annually. And that's just a short snapshot of what we do.
I have a question. On the water testing, the arsenic, right? So there's a state lab and then there's private labs, correct? That people can have their water tested. So how did you track the people that have it tested at the private labs?
So because this is our program and funded through the district, and we worked with the state lab, they actually gave us a reduced cost program. We will get those results. If somebody came in and wanted outside of this program and wanted to test, they could test at any of the 3 labs, but we do not get those results.
Okay, I was wondering.
So, but to get around that though, so the conservation, we work in collaboration with the conservation district. And so we say, if you come back with those results, we will submit them and you will receive $25 back. That's our way of getting those results. And then we never use the name or the address. We really, really try to get the GWIC number, the Groundwater Information Center number. So all the data is through a GWIC number. I mean, they could find it, just make it, but it's just a little more sleuthing on their part.
Yeah, I had never had our well tested. And after I got involved in this, I went to a private lab and had it tested, and there was nothing that really stood out.
Okay.
But I had a hard time reading the results. I didn't really know what was on there. But she said mostly it's people that live near the Missouri River that have the high arsenic.
Yeah, and so at a suggestion at our Water Quality Protection District board meeting a couple months ago, it was suggested, because I let them know that this program was ending, and this is where we usually see our high arsenic is usually coming down from 10 Mile. There's pockets in there, and then Missouri River actually brings it through the irrigation district. Through our studies, we also see high arsenic through those too, because their wells are being recharged from that water source. And so my last radio ad that I did, I specifically put in there, if you are near these water sources, please come in and get your water tested. It was a cheaper route than paying the $10,000 to $30,000 of a mailer to target that. So.
Okay.
And it sounds like reading the results from a private lab is also a challenge. So
It
maybe
is.
that's something that we can offer as a service, is if you got your well tested and need help understanding your results, we have great staff that can.
And
do that.
usually we have great staff. And usually when we meet with the folks upstairs, I give them a card and I always say, if you do not understand something, give me a call, come by and we'll go over it. Because so there are other programs out there. I do know that, has anybody heard of the Well Educated program? We were pretty involved with that for a number of years. Their rate was unbeatable. And then they kind of went up to $75 for a basic screen. Basic screen is bacteria nitrates and then conductivity. That's typically what we're looking for, just as kind of like the bottom line of getting your well tested. But they would give supporting materials, but it was really hard to understand. Usually you could kind of tell on the results. They'll put an H for high. And then if you don't see that, you're typically okay. But you don't know your milligrams per liter, parts per million, or the MCL, it's hard to know if you're at or above the MCL.
When you have your blood tested, they have a thing across the top that says, it should be in this range or whatever. I didn't have that. I'm like, that's pretty basic.
Visually, it's, yeah. And I like to see that line. Usually when I do a presentation, I say, put the line, have the MCL here and then the results. Because then visually you could see, if you're close or way down and you can't see it at all. So I try to visually tell staff to present the data that way.
So does anybody have access to the state lab to have their water tested?
Yes.
Anybody. Okay.
Anybody. It is a little harder that I found since COVID. So it's not as easy as just going into Cogswell building and because from my understanding, it's all still locked. You do have to go in the back to the loading dock. There's the old loading dock, but now they have they got a huge grant and they are reconstructing and getting new equipment and everything. So there's a new loading dock, but all you have to do is push the button, intercom, and somebody will talk to you.
Okay.
It's not as easy as like the Alpine Analytical or Energy Lab. You can just walk through the door and say, hey, this is where these are my concerns. What would you want me to test for? They're pretty helpful.
And I think access will improve once they get all the reconstruction done. They aren't even offering some of their lab services. They'll take your sample and then they'll farm it out to
really?
Yeah, until they get their laboratory. I mean, they're coming into the 21st century finally, so they will be able to offer a lot more analyses too.
Yeah,
and hopefully their storefront will improve as well. And you can access them a little bit more easily. They don't have a great storefront.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Agenda item 5, Board of Health 2026 calendar.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, every year about this time, I start to draft the calendar that guides the agenda for Board of Health meetings. And it was actually Melinda prompting at our last meeting about this very thing. So instead of me doing it in the dark of night, I'm bringing it to you for feedback and improvements. So this is a draft, and these are the topics that I'm suggesting come before the board throughout the course of the calendar year 2026. I would love to have your ideas and feedback on those topics. And then also, if you have training needs that you would like, we can build in training. I've tried to build in training for the board every month. And that's this year, 2025, the training was based on the results from the assessment. So as you all were doing your self-assessment on the governance functions of the board, you all highlighted areas where you thought needed improvement. And I just built those in to training throughout the year. So I would love to have just your feedback on either topics that you don't see that you would like to see come before the board, and then training. So And then another thing to know about this is that it is in draft the whole year because things come up, which means that I'm moving things around. So when we go to build the Board of Health agenda, you may not get quality improvement in July. You may end up getting home visiting instead because our home visiting supervisor was not available in August. You know what I mean? Things like that are happening throughout the year. So if you keep this and are anticipating what topics are covered throughout the year, it may or may not be exactly this. So.
Any questions or feedback or discussion?
Our next meeting is anticipated to be late January.
The schedule will stay the same as it is this year, so it'll be that third Thursday of the month. And November and December are combined to be the first Thursday of the month. So schedule should not change. 1 to 3 on those fourth Thursday of the month.
You scared me. I was like, oh no, I did the whole thing wrong.
Yeah. No.
Okay.
And Sandy has already put those calendar appointments out to you all, so you should have them already preloaded in your calendar for this next year. Fourth Thursday of the month from 1 to 3.
Yeah, middle of Thanksgiving with the, well, you have a 1 hour to meet. Yeah. What that? I was like, I'm not gonna get that one.
I know. Like panic. I'm like,
I don't think that, I'm not going.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm doing turkey thing here now.
Yeah. I said Thanksgiving
Not going
together.
for that one.
Yeah, bring the turkey, bring on.
Yeah.
Outlook is not ideal in that way. You have to do the full year and then go back and amend. And so you get the full year and then she has to go back and fix November and December. Mhm. It's a little bit of a mess at first, but then they're there and yeah, and you can plan accordingly. I did just get an email from the Systems Improvement Office with Department of Public Health and Human Services, and they have been working for months on some resources for boards of health. And it comes as a follow-up to the training, the Board of Health training that occurred at our annual conference this past April. I think the plan is to continue to have Board of Health training at the annual conference. Annual conference in 2026 is in Billings. And so something for you all to think about. There will be a Board of Health track again. And the dates in April are the 14th, 15th, and 16th of April, again in Billings. And we can build that into the our planning for the budget if we have like the chair or somebody that didn't get to participate in the training this past year interested in traveling, we can get registration but the state office is building out some resources, and we could utilize those resources that they're putting together as some training material for monthly meetings if you'd like. Those will be low-hanging fruit for us to just take those resources and visit about them during board meetings. And then there's some really great online modules, and you get every budget season, you get the same module because I think the one that's been pre-prepared is a pretty decent, financing public health. It's been done well by the University of Michigan. So that's the one I show you all every March in preparation for budget season. So there are really great Board of Health online modules. So you'll just have to give me the sense of whether like online modules is something you want to do, and I can throw them in every once in a while, or if you'd rather have, something presented and have good discussion. Like the way in which training comes to you, that would be helpful for me to know as well. What's your preference for the delivery of training?
Any input on that? Or, well, it looks perfect then. Excellent work, Brenda.
It's just really, I think what I heard Melinda say is it would really be nice to know if there is a schedule of topics throughout the year. And so there it is. And if there are things that come up that you're interested in, please just shoot me a note, and Shannon and I meet in advance of board meetings, and we have an opportunity. I get a draft agenda out, and there's opportunity to build things in throughout the year as well. So this isn't your only opportunity to have input into the topics that you hear. So feel free, if something comes up in the middle of the year that you'd like to know more about, let me know, and we can get those on the agenda.
You. All right. Moving on to agenda item number 6, 2026 to 2029 strategic planning.
Right. Mr. Chair, members of the board, that's me again. And thank you, Sandu, for rotating. Trying to in your packet on page 119 begins just a few slides on kind of setting the stage for strategic planning, which we are due to embark on that process, and you'll be involved with that pretty significantly in January. And before I forget, and I will if I don't say it now, so I'm going to interrupt my presentation and ask another question about scheduling. Do we have some flexibility with January to extend our meeting to 3 hours? Would you prefer noon to 3 or 1 to 4? Would be the next question I have for you.
1 to 4 for me.
1 to 4.
1 to 4.
1 to 4.
1 to 4.
Wonderful. Melinda?
I might be the minority with 1 to 3 if a school gets out at 3, so I could join, but I would have to leave.
Okay. Shannon, do you want to make that one? Okay. And so we'll need to adjust January to 3 hours, and we'll do 1 to 4. And Melinda, we'd just love to have you as long as you can be with us, knowing that you'll have to step out and grab kiddos from school. So thank you for letting me divert my presentation. I needed to get that logistical piece out of the way, or I would have forgotten, and you would have gotten an email from me asking the same question. So strategic planning, what you see on the screen is what we call our public health life cycle. And we call it that because this is something that we do on just a regular basis. And it's a 3-year cycle. And it starts with the development of a community health assessment. And so you all saw that happen at the end of last year in 2024, where we published this really great data report that gives us a sense of what the overall health status is for the residents who live in the county. That happens every 3 years so that we can stay up to date as things change in our community. And so that data then is used to put together the community health improvement plan. This is a community plan. We involve lots of stakeholders across the community. This past spring, when we facilitated the process, we had 70 or 80 community partners come to the table, look at that data, and set priority for health improvement. And the 3 priorities that came out were the same as they were 3 years ago, and that was behavioral health, housing, and chronic disease. And so then once those priorities were set by this community stakeholder group, then goals and objectives and activities were then outlined of what we were going to do as a community to improve in those 3 specific areas. That is not a health department plan. That is a community plan. That is a plan that is happening with many, many partners coming together. The implementation of that plan is happening in coalitions in this community. So the behavioral health, for example, that focus area, we have the local advisory council on behavioral health. We have a substance misuse coalition. We have an opioid misuse coalition. We have a suicide prevention coalition. We have a behavioral health leadership team. All of those coalitions are implementing what you see in that community health improvement plan. Similarly, for housing and also for chronic disease, we have these really great community coalitions where we have lots of partners coming in and doing that implementation. Our strategic plan is the department plan, and it is set by you all as the Board of Health, the priorities in which you think we need to be working on and focusing our time and energy on. Ideally, we would see it a link to that community health improvement plan. So we'll take behavioral health again, for example. Our strategic plan should say what it is that the health department is doing to what's our part in it? What's our role in the implementation of that community health improvement plan? And so it's time again. It's time to write an updated strategic plan. So we are coming to the end. We're in year 3 of our current strategic plan. It will expire in April of 2026. You all will get kind of a closeout report on all of the great work and the progress we made and the impacts we had on the previous strategic plan. In the meantime, we're going to be developing a new one so that when April hits and the old one closes out, we're ready to hit the road with a new, fresh strategic plan and a new 3 years to get the work done. So this is the life cycle, happens every 3 years. And from strategic plan, programs then develop their program plans. So what is it that home visiting specifically is going to do to help implement strategic plan? And what is licensed establishment going to do to help implement strategic plan? And then individuals within the health department. We haven't done this formally, but in this iteration of our life cycle, I'm hoping to see these individual employee plans come to fruition, which helps any staff member coming into the health department every day see themselves connected, because what they are doing as an individual staff person should be connected to the program and then connected to the department plan, which is then connected to the community plan. And so there is like deep purpose when staff come into this building to do their work every day. So we'll see that happen in this iteration of the life cycle. We'll have to go back the other direction. So this is our current strategic plan. And I put it in your packet just as a reminder and also as a prompt, because in January, what you will be asked to do during your January Board of Health meeting is review the mission and the vision and the values. So having these in front of you now gives you an opportunity to really look at them. Do you feel them in your body when you come to a Board of Health meeting? Are these the things? This has to be our guiding light, right? The mission is our guiding light for the work that we do. And if we don't get the mission right, then the rest of the strategic plan just is not going to make any sense whatsoever. So we'll have the board review the mission, review the vision, have a conversation about those values. So these are the same values now that we've had for 12 years. And they're excellent values, and we all have them pasted in our offices so that we can be reminded of what our organizational values are. The exercise that I would that you'll go through in January is looking at, first of all, are these the values that you want to continue to support for the health department? And if so, what do they actually look like in practice? What are the behaviors that are associated with leadership? Because what I want to do then is have that same exercise with staff. And then there's no question about what leadership looks like. Like, how do we exhibit in our day-to-day interactions leadership and collaboration and inclusiveness? What are the behaviors that are expected? And so I would like the board to drive that in the beginning. What do you expect to see as far as these values? What do you expect to see when staff are interacting with the public, when staff are interacting with other county partners? Like, how do you want those values to kind of come alive in the community? And then in January, you will also be setting the strategic initiatives. So these are the 5 strategic initiatives that we have had for the last 6 years. So 2 iterations ago, these were the 5 strategic initiatives, and then 3 years ago, they were only slightly tweaked. So still remained as the strategic initiatives that we've essentially had for the last 6 years. And these were set by the Board of Health in a facilitated session. The process that we are using this time, which I'm getting ready to describe to you, will lend to a completely different set of strategic initiatives. And so I think the message I wanted to send to you today is, even though these have been our strategic initiatives for the past 6 years, they probably won't be moving forward based on the process that we're going to use this time around. So on this page of the packet, this just outlines the process that we are currently embarking on within the department and preparing for the January session with you all as the board. And so the first thing that we need to do is understand that our strategic plan is really an opportunity to keep ourselves focused and not spread too thin. What I will say about our current strategic plan is that it is 40 pages long, and it is a little unwieldy and very difficult to implement. And so when we think about step 0 and focusing, I want to say that with an exclamation point. So the next strategic plan, we really need to have it be more focused, and that will then give us an opportunity to have greater impact. And so I keep saying this jokingly, but it's really not. I'm kind of serious about it. It better be less than 40 pages long. So just for the sake of trying to implement, right? And it's a 3-year plan, which means there's really not a lot of time to get a lot of work done. And so we're gonna go into this process with the idea of being very strategic and very focused about things that we need to have the greatest level of impact on. Step 1 is analysis. And so we're actually doing that right now within the health department and with each of our teams. Fred is leading conversations with home visiting, with WIC, with licensed establishment, environmental health, and the prevention team. And those conversations are essentially gathering information about our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So he's performing a SWOT analysis with each team right now. And along with that SWOT analysis and gathering that information from teams, he's having them dream a bit. Like in a perfect world and you have no limitations to resources, what would the program look like, right? So they're getting an opportunity to really dream big about what their programs and services could look like if they had everything that they needed. That information, along with a balanced scorecard, which I'm going to talk about in a second, that information is going to come to you in advance of January's board meeting. So you will have that information to review and understand prior to your role, which is to prioritize. And so just be looking for that in your board packet in advance of your January board meeting. You will get all of the SWOT analysis that we've been doing with the teams and a fully fleshed out balanced scorecard. And I'm going to pause there before I jump into the next 2 steps and see if there are any questions about what we're doing right now and not the analysis. It's the data gathering is what we're doing for you. Gathering the data, and then we're going to present it to you, hopefully in a way that makes it really easy for you then to make some decisions and prioritize.
Make sure the Ford study is included in that data.
Say your question again for me.
Can you make sure that the Ford study is included in that data?
So the information that we're gathering is internal to the work that we're doing. If the board needs research, we absolutely can provide the research based on evidence-based and data available. Yeah. Any other questions? And just for process, as a member of the public, there is an opportunity, there'll be an opportunity for public comment and question.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, so step 2 is prioritization, and that's your role. So as the Board of Health, you get to set the priorities. And so we'll bring to you the data so that you can review it and discuss it and understand it. And then you'll set the priorities for the next 3 years. And that will be a facilitated process at your January meeting. We have a very nice young lady. Her name is Neva from the state health department. They have all been trained in a specific type of strategic planning facilitation. She's going to come and do your facilitation in January. So you don't have to listen to me. Okay. And then what will result from your work prioritizing is an execution plan, essentially a battle plan. So goals, measurable objectives, and then the activities that we will do, and they will be measurable. So I'm hot too.
Yes,
This one is miserable. It's either too hot or it's too cold in here.
Just having the door would help.
Thanks, Amber. So that will be the process that we do internally after you've set the priorities. We will take the priorities and build out goals, measurable objectives, and the activities. We're only going to do activities for 1 year at a time. We learned from the last strategic plan where we did 3 years of activities that was a bad idea. So we'll do activities for a year, and then we'll monitor, discuss, talk about successes. Where did we, where were we not able to implement? Where are we falling? Where are we not meeting the metrics? And then take that as an opportunity then to set activities for year 2. And then at the end of year 2, we'll set activities for year 3. That will give us, we have to be agile. Setting activities 3 years in advance. We know very well in public health that we have absolutely no idea what's going to happen next month, let alone 3 years from now. So we have to be able to be agile and flexible. And doing activities 1 year at a time allows us to be a little bit more flexible with how we implement the priorities that you set. And then I am going to actually jump this one and go to the next one, which is our key performance indicators. And so this is the balanced scorecard. So I refer to this in your data collection, the data collection step of the process. So our key performance indicators are, in definition, really no different than taking your vital signs at the doctor's office. So these are indicators of organizational health. These are indicators of the strength and the stability of the health department. If we get these things right, then we essentially we can shoot for the stars, the moon, and the next galaxy over with work that we can do in the community. So these really do represent what is like best practice in business industry, and that I'm suggesting we adopt for the health department are vital signs. And so they're broken into 4 pieces. We want to look at a fiscal vital sign, which I know Commissioner Wolf will appreciate. Having a fiscal vital sign. How are we doing? What's our blood pressure? What's our pulse on our fiscal health? Customer service would be the second vital sign. And operations, and then people and culture, which is essentially our staff. So our internal engagement of staff. And so what you see here is really a draft. These are items that have currently been drafted by a few staff within the health department that really represent like department-wide vital signs. So, for example, fiscal's pretty straightforward, right? We have a couple of fiscal goals that we need to like keep our finger on the pulse, and that 90-day reserve is one of them. Spending our grants down is one of them. Having a balanced budget, right? So those are the types of things that we can easily measure to know if we are hitting the mark or not. For customer service, we're going to be launching into a customer satisfaction plan next year. So this actually, we won't have any baseline until next year on customer satisfaction. But we do have baseline on our culture of quality, which is in the operations quadrant. We do an assessment on our culture of quality on a pretty regular basis. It's part of our quality council's work. And so we do have a baseline there. And we can keep an eye on that baseline to see if we're making progress towards improvement. Over in people and culture, we have an employee satisfaction survey that we give every year. So we have some baseline information there. We have a workforce development assessment as well. We will get the baseline maybe by your January meeting. That was a statewide assessment, and we're waiting for our specific results to come back. Retention is another suggestion for staff engagement. Do our staff want to stay when we bring them in? I can brag right now and say that we have 84% retention in the health department this year. It's pretty darn good. So as well as the SWOT analysis that are happening within each of the programs are also coming up with their operational key performance indicators. So those are that work is happening right now, and you'll see those on the final draft. So each program will have some kind of an indicator of their program health, and that's going to be added. I'm going to pause there and see, I guess my question to you is, at this point, are there indicators that you're not seeing in financial, customer service, operational, and people and culture that you would like to see? And whether we can put it on there or not is going to be based on whether we have the data. Like if we have some baseline data that gives us, if we don't have the data, then really it's just a gut check on, are we doing well or are we not doing well? We don't want to live in a gut check world. We want to live in a data-driven world where our vital signs are clear, and our vital signs are telling us, are we a healthy, strong, vibrant organization that can accomplish lots of really amazing things or not? And we have some things that we need to be working on.
I have a question. What is community engagement under customer service?
There's a question mark next to that because customer satisfaction, we have a lot of really great coalitions that we work with. And there may be a potential to measure how we interact with our community partners and stakeholders in our coalitions. We have an epidemiologist who you have all met, Valerie, and she might be able to help us measure how well we do with community engagement. So that may or may not be on the final draft when you see it in January, depending on whether she thinks it's something that we can measure. But that's what it's intended to measure, is how well are we engaging with our community partners and stakeholders.
Thank you.
Mike, I'm not seeing you do a happy dance in your chair. I was looking forward to some kind of emotional reaction from you when I did this presentation, only because I know this is right up your alley.
I don't dance.
Yeah.
I don't dance, sorry. At least not in a chair.
And if you have, I know that this is the world that you live in, and this is a strength that you have. If you have suggestions or want to have a conversation beyond today, as we prepare for January, I would love to meet with you.
Well, you're hitting the important pieces of a strategy, which is trying not to boil the ocean and doing realistic measurements and having realistic plans. You know, like when you said you're not doing a 3-year plan, that's excellent. We do the same here. We do them 1 year at a time. realizing that things can roll over into another year, but predicting the future is just too hard, beyond 12 months. So I'm not seeing, nothing's jumping out at me as being inappropriate or unrealistic.
Another thing I may ask you in January is the red, yellow, green. So what you see on the balanced scorecard right now is what I consider to be red, yellow, and green. And so when you get the final draft, I may ask I will be asking actually, if that aligns with what you expect. So, for example, the culture of quality assessment. So the second one down, it says number of elements, which are 6 in the culture of quality assessment that are scored in either phase 4, 5, and 6. And right now we only have 3 that score in that and those phases 4 through 6. And then I've suggested that anything below 3 is in the red. Anything between 3 and 4 is a yellow, and 6 is our ultimate goal, a green. And so if you have opinions or would like to see a different set of expectations for what especially green is, then I would love to hear those. And you'll have an opportunity in January.
Some of those, as they're laid out currently, industry standards, like 90% is green and retention, all that seems like retirements are going to be there, but
So retention is actually the one I looked up for industry standard, and that is what they say is industry standard. And so I did use those. Yep. Yeah, the 90-day reserve is pretty straightforward because essentially we're told by law that we need to maintain a 90-day reserve, not higher, not lower. So that was pretty straightforward. That one made a lot of sense. But there's some of these others that, it's objective, and you as the board can say like what you expect green to be. Like I chose 80% because that's a B student, right?
I wouldn't know.
I'm not, yes. And a B felt good. Like that we're doing good if we can be a B student. So
it follows the Pareto principle as well in statistics, which is 80%. Commonly called the rule of 80-20, right? So if you're hitting 80%, you're probably statistically valid.
Any questions? And what I hope I've done is get you really excited for January. You have some, it's hard work. So you'll have some hard work ahead of you. And my goal is to make sure that you have everything you need in front of you prior to January so that you have time to think and process and review and even ask questions so that when that 3-hour session comes in January, that we really can be productive and efficient with our time and get through as much as we can. If we need to flow into the February board meeting, we have enough time to do that because our end goal is to have a new strategic plan adopted by the Board of Health in April. So we have some time if the 3 hours in January aren't enough to go into February if needed. So
I'll bring a fan. Just to
keep it awake.
Yeah.
Just keep the temperature down.
Yeah. Some snacks maybe.
Yeah. You're gonna need beer if it's gonna be 3 hours.
And as Brenda mentioned, we will be getting additional information for this process between now and our next meeting in January. So be on the lookout for that. And maybe one of us will send a reminder, a week or so before the meeting, just highlighting kind of, just a reminder, because we have quite a bit of time between now and then. So there's going to be a little bit of legwork on our own outside of before the meeting. But if you want to talk through anything kind of before the meeting, reach out to me or Drenda. I think like we could, either of us could sort of arrange something if you want to kind of prep a little bit with some support. All right. Is that everything?
That's everything.
All right.
Yeah. The other, the sheet in your packet that I just kind of breezed over and didn't spend any time on gives you an understanding of the difference between a key performance indicator and a measurable objective. They are related. They are cousins, but they are different. So your key performance indicator is really that it's that metric of health. It's like your vital signs. And then your measurable objective is going to be what you're going to do to improve that. If you're not hitting your goal on your key performance indicator, what you're going to do to fix it. So it's that measurable objective. We're going to increase quality, the culture of quality in the health department to 6 by 2027. That's a measurable objective, whereas the key performance indicator is just the vital sign. It's just the number where we currently are.
Thank you. All right, agenda item number 7, continuing the Board of Health Effectiveness Assessment. So we did quite a bit of work on this last meeting and are resuming our assessment, I think page 125 out of 140 in our packets on legal authority. Is I think where we are resuming. Okay, great. All right. So sorry.
That's okay. If you want to scroll down to, did I put in beyond that? There we go. So I put the most updated. So these are your questions to ask.
Okay. Okay, so page 131.
Thank you.
All right, so within legal authority, exercise legal authority as applicable by law and understand the roles, responsibilities, obligations, and functions of the governing body, health officer, and agency staff. So the first function, ensure that the governing body, us, and its agency act ethically within the laws and rules, local, state, and federal, to which it is subject. Any thoughts about this? I don't think we have issues with this for the most part. I think we have really good discussions about sort of what our role is at this kind of local government level, what our authority is under state statute, how we and the department specifically interplays with state law and federal the federal government. I think we've had some really good discussions about that and sort of how our authority fits into all of that.
So you've done a good job of bringing in support staff that keeps us on track for what we can work within the law. Like, without you, we'd be, if we were just trying to vote on this stuff without you, we couldn't do it. And what's the gal's name? Beth. Yeah, she always brings a wealth of information. And the attorneys that have come, and we've always had really good, I think, at every meeting, the necessary people here to help us make the right decisions. So we're not getting into trouble, with statutes or laws or the community or homeowners or whatever.
Yeah, and I think we have a good, or at least we have an sort of ethics disclosure, right? So, that's covered. I don't know that we've looked at that recently, but I think it's consistent with the law and what we're supposed to be doing. All right. Next function, provide or arrange for the provision of quality core services to the population as mandated by law through the public health agency or other implementing body. certainly, I think through the strategic plan in part, kind of providing guidance to the department and its staff as to priorities. I also think, and maybe we should revisit this. I know we did a training, I think you gave us a training recently that was around the core public health.
The foundational public health services.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. And so I think that's helpful to sort of revisit every so often. And I think that to remind ourselves of what those are.
And the 10 essential services are outlined in law. They are explicitly listed in Title 50. Yeah.
Yeah.
And speaking of that, you always do a very good job laying out what things are mandated by law, like when we're reviewing the budget, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. All right. Engage legal counsel when appropriate. I think we have the benefit of great legal counsel from the county attorney's office and participatory legal counsel when we've requested. I think Nico, one of the other assistant county attorneys, has attended several meetings. Drenda has been really good about foreseeing specific issues that might be legally complicated, where we need to ask questions, and having communicated that to the county attorney's office before our meetings so that we have that as a resource. I don't really see any issues there. Monitor for threats to and provide advice on the legal authority of the health department and its health official. I don't think we do this at all. I don't know that we've ever talked about this since I've been here.
That's because it's not something that has come up.
Yeah. I think maybe that's something we should visit kind of soon, because I don't know that we've had a conversation on this since I've been on the board. Secure legal assistance to meet the intent of laws and mandates. I think we kind of covered that. Address assaults and threats and ensures appropriate policing agencies are involved as needed. Again, we've not really talked about this. We haven't really had a need for this.
Not since COVID.
Well, okay. So again, maybe we should visit this in tandem with the previous function we discussed, not really having addressed.
This Helena City Police is a phone call away.
Yeah. Do you have there been any kind of incidents where we had that we as a board weren't aware of that were kind of might be a blind spot for us?
No. No, I think the best examples happened during COVID, and that was there were some threats that were made to Board of Health members, and the police department had everybody's addresses and circled their houses and kept them safe. And there were instances where threats came here, and the police department were present and available. And so I think that in practice, it's happening, and I don't think that there's anything more that the board, as long as you know that that's the case. If it wasn't, if we didn't have a good relationship with the Helena City Police and they weren't responsive to us, that would be an opportunity for you to step in and ensure that it does. So a conversation with the chief of police, for example. Yeah.
Have any of the sanitarians who are out in the field, sometimes in remote areas, faced any sort of, 20 years ago when I was a sanitarian, there were definitely places that you asked for a police escort to go with you.
And our sheriff's department is more than happy to escort when we need it.
Good.
Yep. Good partners.
Great.
And if any of that crosses over to the East Hill area as well, our police are available for
Angels. We don't have any issues.
Sure.
With your chief of police retiring though, can I call you?
No. But yeah, you certainly can call me on, but I'll direct you to the new chief of police. We're gonna hire one, so.
Yeah. Thank you for the reminder. We just haven't had any issues in East Helena, so it's
Good.
easy to point to situations where we've called the sheriff's department and we've called the Helena Police Department. So yeah, we know that you all are ready and willing.
All right. Next function, partner engagement. Build and strengthen community partnerships through education and engagement to ensure the collaboration of all relevant stakeholders in promoting and protecting the community's health. So the first function represent a broad cross-section of the community. And I don't know if this means the board is representing a cross-section of the community, like board members, or if with a broad, like I'm not sure based on the description and the function.
My interpretation is both.
Okay.
So our community partnerships, I would name the Board of Health as an opportunity. And then also like all of the coalition work that we do are opportunities to engage the public in the work that happens within the health plan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I definitely think the size of our board does lend itself to naturally having a pretty good cross-section of the community. And I think the work that, again, the department staff do to build coalitions, to engage stakeholders, we don't necessarily do that directly, but I think the department staff is very good with that. All right. Lead and fully participate in open, constructive dialogue with a broad cross-section of members of the community. I think that, again, the department does this really well as a whole. I mean, obviously all of our meetings are open and we're just citing very specific things at our meetings, but day to day, it seems like the department staff is really doing a great job of this.
And I think you guys use social media too, which helps get to more of our community and hopefully get them engaged.
Yeah, I think Amber has done a really good job with the limited resources that she has for kind of communication outside, external communication. I think, she's been very creative with that.
There's been a few events this year even that has lent to constructive community dialogue. The Invisible Shield earlier this year, I guess it was last year, but into January. And then the sober delight conversations that are happening are really nice opportunities for constructive dialogue. So
next, serve as a strong link among the public health agency, the community, and other stakeholder organizations. Again, I think the nature of our board and sort of the representation of the two mayors, the county commission, the city commission, as well as the community, and the different specialists on the board. I mean, I think we don't really have a choice in that, but that, naturally, I think this is there are people coming to our table here at board meetings that represent different parts of the community and bring different perspectives from the community members they're interacting with.
and then back again, I see that happening in both directions. Board members bring information here, but then also take information here back to variety.
Next, provide leadership to ensure that things are getting done as planned. Yeah, I mean, again, Drenda, you do a great job of keeping us apprised, prioritizing things for our agendas. That is, I think, going well.
Yeah, the Healthy Together work is a good example of getting things done as planned. That's a community collaboration that makes sure that the CHIP is done on the schedule it needs to be done on, and the CHA is done on that schedule. And so that might be a good example.
Yeah. Build linkages between the public and partners that can mitigate negative impacts and emphasize positive impacts of current health trends. One thing I was thinking, one thing this reminds me of is maybe the last meeting or the meeting before we had the presentation on like that Val was talking about like wastewater surveillance and the fact that we rely so heavily on that, but the data collection is not done by us. It's done by a researcher outside of our agency. And I think that's just a recent example I can think of something super important that, you know, the core of it is not being done by the initial baseline. What we need to use that, to have that data is not being done by us, and we're relying on other community partners.
Yeah, Carroll College is a great partner in that wastewater. And then we have the state, DPHHS is another good partner in
that. Next, add new partners as needed for work detail and or formed new board committee to address emergent needs. I don't know that since I've been here, I don't know that we've had a need for this, or if it's come up. Maybe we've had a need, but we've not done it. I do know the one example I can think of is the finance committee that we had last year. To look at the budget, sort of pre-evaluate the budget before our big discussion as a full board. I don't know that there's been another need for this, but certainly I think that's a good reminder that for complicated issues or issues that need more attention, that we can create committees within the board, and either like permanently or just ad hoc as issues come up.
This makes me think of the Montana Environmental Health Trust in East Helena. That's not, that's a partner expert that was brought in to help the emergent need of the Superfund site in East Helena. Of course, they were brought in a long time ago, but they continue to be at the table, providing ongoing updated information to the board about the situation that's happening in East Helena. And that was like a partner that was brought in to help with make sure we had experts at the table.
Yeah, great. Next, proactively prevents poor communication and misinformation when addressing the public. We don't directly address the public too much, but I think the department, our supervision of you and of the department, I think the department does a great job of that. Again, Amber, kudos to Amber for her kind of leadership there and providing, I think, what is always sort of providing public health information can be quite difficult, right? Because you don't want to get too far into like the clinical side of things but at the same time, we want to encourage healthy practices in the community. So I think we do a good job of balancing those things, and by we, the department does, and I think that all of our kind of public-facing communication, whether it's kind of informal on social media or the formal things that we read about, I know Amber had an op-ed at one point. I read an op-ed that she had submitted to the IR. Just, I think, pretty good high quality communication across the board.
And when board members have questions, we also bring in I remember bringing Shelley down with the insert from the vaccination itself, because there were questions about the additives that I think you asked. Mm-hmm. So just making sure that we take the time to answer questions when they come up, and by providing information, the facts that we have, right? The board has the information. If you're asked in the community, you can say, I don't know, go ask Brenda and we'll figure it out. But it's really nice when you're able to say, oh yeah, we talked about that at a board meeting and here's the information that I have and this is what I learned. And so.
Yeah. We have 2 sections left and we have about 5 minutes left. Do you want to push this out? I know we have a kind of a mega meeting next time, so I think that's probably the priority is our strategic plan, but I think we can continue working on this.
I don't think there is a need to rush it. Yeah. And I think it's more important to have save it and have the conversation than to try to rush it through. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. So we've stopped at continuous improvement.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, that's all of the agenda items. Any public comment on anything within the board's authority before we adjourn?
Yeah, I was wondering if you guys were aware of the lawsuit against the CDC about the vaccine schedule. If any of you would have read the Ford study. It would be one of your mission statements to protect the public.
Yeah, you're welcome to write public comment, but this isn't really a question and answer period. So if you have any comment you'd like to provide, we'll consider that. But it's more an opportunity for you to just provide comment if you'd like.
Okay, well, I've been following McCullough Foundation and I'm sure was being a champion of providing public information about the dangers of the current vaccine schedule. And I noticed that online you guys are still pushing vaccines. So I think that's pretty dangerous or endangering the public like that when there's public information that's contrary to the benefit of vaccines.
Thank you for your comment.
I pay close attention to that. I follow it every day, all day long. I'm just not sure how to interject that here into the Board of Health. I haven't figured out how to bridge that. You know, it's up there with the CDC. And how do we bridge that with the Board of Health?
Well, public information, but the release of public information, everybody that's on the board should be aware of all this information.
I agree, but I'm not sure how you want to deal, how the board wants to deal with that.
Interested in protecting the public.
Yeah, no, I know.
That's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Any announcements?
No announcements today.
And any additional discussion or comments before we adjourn? All right. We're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.